All right, welcome everyone to the latest installment of SOCAP Next. My name is Carrie Hansen, and I'm the Vice President of SOCAP. These conversations are designed to spur the next levels of action in our work in the impact investing space. Our partners for today's conversation include Social Venture Circle, Nexus Global Summit, the California Endowment. I also want to give special thanks to Laura O'Connor and all of the work that she has done to create the many pieces of content and knit together communities here during 2020. We are going to have an incredible conversation today, and I'm delighted that this is our final conversation for 2020, more to come for 2021. But to just get us rolling and begin our centering and grounding, I'd like to turn this over to Christina and Lupe, and then I will see you all at the end of this event. We are recording live on YouTube, and we are also live here and ready for broadcast. Thank you, Christina and Lupe. Over to you.
Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate you. How's everybody doing this afternoon? We hope that this finds you well and all of your relatives well. Lupe and I, in preparation for this conversation, we wanted to ask you all to really enter into a deep conversation with us. And we didn't want to kind of have the same old, panels. It's the end of the year. It's been a crazy year. I'm not going to say it's been the worst year because listen, there's a lot of transformation that needs to happen. But we really wanted to have a kitchen table conversation, a conversation that was where folks can be really frank, that we can speak the truth with each other as family, trying to figure out how to create better infrastructure where youth-led movements are at not just the forefront of what we do, but that they're nourished and they're nourished systemically in everything that we do. And so with that, we wanted to shake off basically the day. For some of us, it's towards the end of the day for our East Coast relatives and those across the pond. And others, they're on the West Coast. I've also heard it might be the best coast, but I'm not going to start any fights early in the conversation. You know what I mean? We can have that later. But just want to take a really deep couple of breaths together. So I'm just going to lead us in a couple of breaths. If you're kind of all over the place, feel free to set both your feet on the ground if you're seated, or if you're one of those wonderful folks with standing desks, God bless you. That's amazing. Kind of shift yourself there, and let's just breathe right from the grassroots that comes up through our body, that nourishes us, and just breathe it right through the top of our crown of our best selves. And then exhale, the whole entire day out. And then another inhale through the ground, up through our bodies. Notice wherever it's hitting you. Through the crown. And then whoosh, let's let 2020 go. And then our last breath, let's inhale everything through the ground, all the way up through our bodies, wrapping up around our crown. And then whoosh, exhale anything that is holding us back from building exactly what is being called of us in this world. I'm going to pass it to my new friend and sister, Lupe, here to lead us in some grounding meditation, and then we're going to enter into some real talk conversations. So welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for joining on this circle today and taking some time out of your day to engage in real conversations. And I'm going to invite you into a really quick guided visualization for us to be able to come into this space with some big dreams, big hopes, and visioning of what we're trying to co-create collectively as a community, right? When we think about young people and building the leadership and development of the upcoming generation. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. And imagine yourself in outer space right now. Do you see the earth? Do you see her waters? Maybe some green or brown spots of the land. And then I'm going to invite you to bring yourself down to your city or to the communities that you serve. Just stay afloat on top of the neighborhood. And start naming what you see. You might see more buildings than trees. Do you see the young people playing in the park? Do you hear the noises of the cars? What does that sound like? Now I'm going to invite you to go a little deeper and take yourself to the healing and safe space of that community. Who is there? How does it feel to be in that safe, brave, healing space? And what do you see? Are there murals? Is there a health center? Begin feeling that and seeing it. Now, I'm going to invite you to open up your eyes and carry those feelings, that vision, those images with you, right? From a macro, watching the earth, diving ourselves into what this community and infrastructure can look like, not just environmentally, right? Physically, but giving yourself permission to explore what that healing and safe space can look like for us and the young people. So yeah, wrapped up that guided visualization, and kick us off to start the conversation and circle with that same energy. So is it okay if I kick off, Christina, or we want to? Do you have something else to add? I think a big part of, I always enjoy this specific guided visualization because it really calls to me my own growth and what it meant to really develop as a young person in the communities that I live in. I am calling in from Coney Island here in San Diego, small community named City Heights. And fun fact, I actually just submitted my Urban Pine grad school app last night. So this visualization, what it means to develop an infrastructure for me, really, comes at the right time when I think about developing and envisioning.
Congratulations, that's a huge deal. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. And so I think being able to step into this space with folks who are willing, to step into these conversations and dream big and have big visions of how we could, reimagine leadership and infrastructure for young people. For me, it's like, yay, these are my people. This is who I want to work with in the future, right? So I really just want to share that excitement on my behalf. And I do have Karla here with me, who will share a little bit about her experience and her own visions and dreams. So I will have her introduce herself really quickly, and then I will go ahead and share a couple of questions. Karla?
Thank you, Lupe. Yeah, I think very much aligned with what Lupe just shared. I think this envisioning and this grounding is very useful in the sense of trying to figure out what I want to do next in my life, right? Organizing for 6 years with young people across California, I think is very empowering. But there always seems to be something missing. And I'm always like, what can I do that is missing? What piece can I bring back to my community? How can I invest in myself to come back to community and continue to invest into the work that is being done? Very much like Lupe, I am applying to grad school. I have not submitted my application. She beat me on that one, but definitely shout outs to her on that. But it is challenging, I think, when there isn't enough resources in our communities. I'm calling in from Boyle Heights, East LA, California, doing work with young people to end gender-based violence and to end homelessness for young people ages 16 to 21. And I think due to COVID, there's just a lot that has come up, right? A lot of resources that we've noticed that is missing for young people, right? To kind of do the work that they're trying to do and also to end violence in community as a whole. So I'll toss it back to to Lupe as well.
Oh, and then we also have, I don't know, Christina or Brian, if you all would want to hop on in this and have a little circle here of, what we envision for the future.
Brian, would you like to introduce yourself and jump in on this?
Sure. Hey, everyone. It's really great to be with you this afternoon. I'm Brian. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am with Piece by Piece Strategies, and I also am one of the project coordinators for the Visionary Freedom Fund. And when I really think about the future and the movements that we're trying to build, and there are so many organizations and people out here who are already doing a lot of this work, but I really think about deep partnership. I think about deep collaboration, and I really see that it's going to take all of us to build the movements that we need. And for me, right, and the role that I'm in, I really think about what is the role of philanthropy and its relationship to movements right now. And particularly, how do we put movements in the driving seat of where resources are needed to go? How do we put young people in roles where they can determine what resources are needed to support them and their communities? Folks on this call already talked about the great work that they're doing and leading in LA or wherever it might be, right? So how do we move those resources that are extracted from Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, particularly in the context of the United States, and return those resources back to those communities and make sure that they have a say in where those dollars are going? And I see a future where that can actively happen and where that is actively possible.
Awesome. Yeah, Lupe, when I saw that vision of my own community, first and foremost, it was a community where everyone was safe and free to be themselves, right? And so I loved when you zoomed over the park, for example. We don't have a park in my neighborhood, but we do have a cemetery, even though I know that sounds a little weird, but we have a cemetery. And, it has a very large hill, and I'm, in Haudenosaunee territory. So I'm in upstate New York, and it's already started to snow. So, I heard those joyous, playful, screams of excitement and in our community and with all the young folks that live in our community from so many different backgrounds, because we are a place that welcomes all new Americans. And so more than half of my community are new Americans. They're first generation, and so we welcome that. So that was one area that, I appreciated in the guided meditation that you just shared with us. The other part for me is, I really believe that we have been in a juncture point for quite a while to shift philanthropy to not just be around supporting specific advocacy here and there, but actually help support and move assets into frontline communities for them to actually govern and lead their own solutions. But oftentimes, even well, oftentimes we haven't prepared our communities to actually be able to absorb that level of capital, because historically we haven't actually put the resources in their hands to do that, right? And so part of what I also see is just community centers all over my community that are helping folks start their own social enterprises, and where community-led public safety is happening in our community, and it is employing as well as led by and owned by our communities, and all of our restaurants and small businesses are, you know, owned and led by those communities. And so when I think of also like the infrastructure that's in place, is that for a good amount of time, we have actually resourced frontline communities to own and lead their own solutions. And that's part of what creates that safety and that freedom. And so I think, especially thinking about the role of capital, not just philanthropy, philanthropy is just an asset class, right? But you know, it's the role of capital and how that can actually be geared towards building the infrastructure and resourcing an infrastructure that's led by frontline communities, I think inherently and always should be centering, especially young folks, in that process. And I know we're shared by a number of folks on the call that also feel that way too. So I'm excited to hear from them. But I'm interested also, Lupe, from you and Karla, Brian, and anyone else who wants to jump in, you know, what do you think are some of the barriers to get towards these visions? What do you feel like, you know, are some of the, well, I should also say, what are some of the models that you've seen to overcome those barriers too? But yeah, what are some of the areas that you saw?
Yeah, I could hop in really quick and then I'll pass it over to my fellow friend, Karla. I think one thing that I like, well, I started my work, my leadership development when I was 14 years old. And it's been a journey, being able to understand the different elements and sectors that contribute to my own leadership development and right community organizing, and the social justice movement that I have been involved in. And so I feel like when it comes down to, you know, what really kept me engaged, what really developed me, it's really people. I think people investing in me as mentors, right, as coaches, and teachers, and being able to guide me and learn how to navigate all these different systems and spaces. Coming from grassroots and then going into a philanthropic space, I was like, whoa, what terms are they using? What does this mean? And I think like I had folks who were willing to explain to me, right? Like, this is philanthropy's role in the movement. This is how we help, but this does not take away from your power, right? As a young person in the grassroots movement. So I always give props to my mentors and teachers and guides, for all of that.
Mentors and femtours, I love it.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about it. But I'll pass it over to Karla and see if she has anything else to share.
Definitely. Thank you, Lupe. Just echoing everything that Lupe has already mentioned. For me, it has been the same. And I believe also being intentionally included into spaces, right, and being put into spaces that are for me, right, that are surrounded by people who can teach me and show me more, right? Because for me, I'm always like, what am I missing in my toolbox? What tool do I need today, right? And I think a big part of stepping into this philanthropy work, and just the older I get and the different spaces I'm in, is it's code switching, right? Learning to kind of learn the language, right? And I think it also sucks that we have to learn a different language to kind of be on the same space and same level as everyone, right? So I'm always kind of like, dang, I gotta show up in a different way. But also I'm learning also how to show up into spaces and being authentically myself, but also knowing that I have to code switch, explain certain things in a different way, right? I can't show up how I would show up in a community meeting with my young people into a space like here, because then, right, there's always the question of, is she legit? What does she have that makes her different from everybody else, right? So for me, it's learning to show up as myself, but also learning that a big part of this work is code switching and always learning. And I think, right, there's always something to learn. So for me, when I walk into spaces, showing up with an open heart and open mind and being willing to learn from somebody and knowing that I also can share experience and share truth as well.
Brian, Albert, you want to chime in here? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here if that's okay, Christina. Just, following up on Lupe and Karla's wisdom. So allow me to introduce myself. Albert Maldonado with the California Endowment, and I've had the good fortune, really for the last decade to work with young people across California as change makers. So I just kind of wanted to root, kind of our, how and why we show up in the way that we do from a public health perspective. So one, it's been incredible to see Lupe and Karla on their leadership journey. What Lupe didn't tell you is that when she was 14, she organized a skate park in City Heights that young people still enjoy now. And it's there, and it's a living place that, lots of folks congregate at. Lupe also, as part of her statewide work, really made sure that we weren't just focusing on boys and young men of color, but really centering and investing in the leadership of young women. And Karla's just done some incredible work in the East LA community, raising really important issues around, redefining masculinity and just, really centering the investment of young people. So I say that to lean into this idea that over the last decade, the California Endowment has really, kind of invested deeply in place. And that really means an investment in people. And I think we kind of see it here, right? So we didn't just invest in community, kind of groups, but also invested in ourselves, right? How do we actually practice what we're asking folks out in the community? And so through the President's Youth Council, which I, again, had the good privilege of staffing for the last 8 years, we kind of created it. We had a lot of creative autonomy to mess up and adapt along the way. But it took 8 years, and I was sharing this with Karla and Lupe earlier today. It took 8 years for our PYs, our President's Youth Council, to exist. And now they show up with our board of directors authentically by themselves. And there's this authentic relationship, but it's really about how do we practice that and how do we build those pathways of opportunities for young people, even within our organization. So long way again to say that, over this last decade, what we've really understood from young people's point of view is how systems of oppression have really compromised the health and opportunity of young people across California communities, right? And so it's kind of hard to reckon with when you also juxtapose that against California's wealth. California, is the ag capital of the world. California sets the tone for, technology infrastructure. California tells the world stories. And yet there's this mirage that in the Central Valley, access to healthy foods is a real issue and continues to be an issue now, right? So how do we really invest in grassroots leadership? How do we really kind of network that together so that you have local, infrastructure, you have statewide infrastructure, but really what our folks are telling us is build opportunity pathways, really move away from systems of oppression and really help us to reimagine into the future. And so I think that's the charge, and that's really what we hear from our young people when they say invest in us. So Christina, your vision around like a community center in each community, yes, why not? And it needs to be community owned, it needs to be community led, and that's an investment in power infrastructure in perpetuity. And we see it with groups like RISE, we see it with groups like Inner City Struggle in East LA. And, just to invoke, one of my mentors, Nane Alejandrez, founder of Santa Cruz Barrios Unidos, he often talks about, we're a land-based people without land. And so what does it really mean to kind of connect those dots and build infrastructure that's regenerating and self-supporting and self-sufficient for communities? So I just wanted to root it. That's how we come into this from a health foundation perspective. We want to see healthy communities, right, with plenty of opportunity for our young people that meet them where they are and really celebrate their leadership. And beyond that, really like put them on the pathway to opportunity.
Brian, do you want to?
Yeah, and I can jump. Oh,
yeah, feel free.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question and other folks for sharing so far. When I, and sort of from the vantage point I sit at, when I think about barriers for us really being able to push the envelope more, I think a lot about the institutions that are the ones setting the tone for these things, right? And so across the the country right now, there are trillions of dollars sitting in endowments, sitting in excess wealth across the globe, right, and across the country. And if we are really serious about being accountable to movements, if we're really serious about investing in sharing power with folks, right, we have to, institutions, right, and individuals, we have to actually own the power and wealth that we're controlling, and name what it is, put some dollar signs behind it, right, and really think about, is our core purpose about sharing power with community, about transforming the way that accountability looks, or is our core function about sort of maintaining our institution and showing our institution in the best light? And I think sometimes, you know, in order to get to where we're getting to, I think we have to move past the like self-congratulatory impact, right, and really get to what we're talking about of sharing power with movements. And I think there are so many models out there that are already doing that. So many organizations that are advocating for more resources. And I think, you know, we have to be real, and it's a hard look in the mirror, right? To say, actually, like, what is the true obligation of our boards? What is the true obligation of our leadership right now? And its true relationship to community. Because we are seeing increased need. We're seeing COVID. We're seeing, you know, the amount of folks that are facing eviction or aren't paying their rent right now, right? These are huge numbers of crisis that is affecting our communities across the country. And at the same time, right, depending at different philanthropic vehicles or different folks with wealth, some folks are doubling down and like, yes, we're going to move more resources to community and step up to meet this need. And other folks, right, are pulling back a little bit of, we're going to assess, we're going to look at our planning. And I think now, if we want to build the future that we all want to see, that we really need to look at the role that our institutions are playing, and move from that place of, let's actually be ready to transform power. And that means that some of our institutions are going to have to show up differently. And that means some of our movements are also going to have to be in real dialogue with philanthropy. And that is work, right? It is work of organizers to join these types of calls or bodies that are asking for these conversations. And it's real work and real risk a lot of time for folks in philanthropy, but I think those are the places where we can make those risks. And we are seeing institution after institution and organizations step up to that challenge. And that's what really excites me about this moment, is that folks are stepping up in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great segue actually to connect with you, Kat, and welcome you to the to the table here as well. Because, you know, and Eldra, I'd love for you to follow on after after Kat shares, but just, you know, from your perspective, Kat, you've really been deploying both philanthropy as well as really looking at all of your different forms of both assets as well as really your power, right? And so you've leveraged your social capital, your cultural capital as yourself, as well as your economic capital across asset classes. So would you mind sharing, as we kind of begin to shift into great models that folks should be looking at around the country, would you mind sharing a bit around your approach and how you came to that? And then Eldra, maybe you could share a bit more about your all's approach as well. You're still on mute. The phrase of 2020, my friend.
I know, especially for 62-year-olds. Sorry about that. Dogs in the background.
No worries.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everybody. I'm quite humbled to be here as a non-youth, but one who deeply respects young people. I actually have 4 adult children, and throughout their lifetime, I have tried to counter what I see as deep disrespect for young voices in many of our societal institutions. So I might answer this opportunity by talking about first principles that motivate our work and inform it along the way. And I have a longer answer about the strategies. So First of all, our first principles are in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I work with a very young team that's very, very diverse as well, both in our family office and at Tomcat Foundation. We're a small foundation. We don't have a big board or programmatic staff. We're really motivated by some fundamental work we do in guaranteeing basic human rights for young people, investing in their leadership and development, philanthropic reform efforts, many of which address the criticisms we've heard so far that I think are deeply true, evolving societal institutions, creating a regenesis community of practice around equitable community economic development, developing cooperative business and cultural models, and a good life pledge about shifting assets. So the first principles include that we cede power to our partners who are primarily BIPOC led. Our mantras include put more and different people in charge. They have the life experience to address what are long-standing and very egregious injustices in our country, stemming from the long list: slavery, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, land theft, native genocide, persecution of immigrants and refugees, less than personhood for women, degradation of our environmental commons. So another mantra is that we believe that when everybody owns a little bit of everything, we thrive. And when anybody owns too much of anything, we all suffer. We try to show up as an anti-racist ally. We banish ageism, cynicism, not invented here syndrome. And we need to be part, as Edgar Villanueva counsels, of decolonizing investments, loans, and grants. But our primary objective at the moment attends to also many of the things that have just been said, that it's time to shift assets back to the communities from whom they were stolen. And we include among assets wealth, both at the community and individual level, ownership, control, opportunity, land, and we're trying to do that across all our activities, including a good life pledge that I just took, and I'm trying to recruit other philanthropists to shift a third of the assets in my control to BIPOC-led community equitable development efforts and community control and ownership. And that's just a starting point.
That's awesome. Eldra, do you want to share a little bit from your perspective around how you've structured, youth development and making sure that young people are centered in all of your work, and also just introduce yourself? Welcome to the table.
Well, thank you very much. And I will begin by introducing myself as an extended youth here, proud to be on this panel. My name is Eldra Jackson III, and I serve currently as co-executive director of Inside Circle. And we approach this from a healing perspective, from a healing model, and recognizing that most human beings that I've come in contact with are possess some sort of trauma internally that they've dealt with in their life, be it personal, be it communal, whatever that might look like, something is there. And until I have the spaces in my life to be able to sit down and, number one, recognize that within myself and figure out where those things were showing up in my life and holding me back, I was incarcerated up here and in here. And so in our communities, we have people who are incarcerated who've never seen a penitentiary, who've never seen a jail. We're locked into a framework of stinking thinking. And so what we're doing is building a model to support young folks in, number one, recognizing where they may be hurt, because as the maximum at Inside Circle goes, hurt people, and healed people, heal people. So we start with supporting hurt people begin to heal. And then as they begin to heal, we've got a model built up called the Young Adult Empowerment Program, where we then begin to support young people in figuring out how to take agency over their lives. Because it's one thing to provide resources, but it's another thing for me to feel like I deserve those resources, for me to feel like I have that coming, so that I can then move with purpose with those resources and do something that is healthy within the community with those resources and the lived experience that I might be bringing to the table.
Yes, thank you. I call that the youth wisdom, right? Acknowledging and valuing our young people's wisdom. Then I see Jessica joined us too. Jessica, would you like to introduce yourself and offer some thoughts of the conversation of, you know, how are we investing in young people?
Yeah, hi. My name is Jess, she, her, hers pronouns. I work with Brian. I definitely respect and appreciate this conversation around youth organizing. Started organizing when I was 17. So definitely often get called a yelder in a lot of spaces, that youth elder, which feels really odd because I'm definitely not an elder yet. But much respect to this conversation around, you know, our responsibility, our accountability to young people in this moment. It's just such a much needed, you know, conversation, you know, like to Brian's point earlier around philanthropic accountability. I mean, it's really real. You know, when you look at the national foundations that sit on $1 trillion collectively in endowments that are untouched, when we know it would cost about $20 billion to end homelessness, you know, $25 billion to end hunger in the US. Right. And folks are like, 1 trillion, how many billions is that? I did Google it. It's like 1,000 billion. So, you know, like that, you know, 45 billion, and we would still have, you know, almost 1,000 billion left towards all other things if we really reallocated resources appropriately. So definitely just appreciative to be here and a part of the conversation.
Thank you. And then I think just talking about, like, you know, you all have these infrastructures in your own institutions, organizations. I think I want to hear from Karla really quick in here. What are some things that, you know, have worked for you in your own experiences, as you hear everyone else sharing their practices in their own spaces?
Yeah, thank you. I think just echoing what Jessica just said, right, about the yelders. It's a buzz term within when you've been organizing for so long, right? I think that's definitely, though, what has helped a lot when organizing with young people is surrounding them with folks who have been doing the work for so long, and they become these yelders. And we're now beginning this cycle of intergenerational healing and intergenerational organizing, which I think is really important, right? Because it was already mentioned that we all carry trauma, and specifically when we're doing organizing work, a lot of us tend to navigate more towards the organizing work to heal. I think for me, from my personal experience, right, that's why I delved into organizing for so long, since I was 15, 16, very much to Jessica. So I'm definitely relating with her right now a lot, right? But I began organizing very young, and it's because of that healing piece, right? And a lot of young people stay doing this work because there is the piece of advocacy. They have autonomy to choose, and they're able to kind of voice their opinions and feeling heard and seen, which I think is very important to center young people in the movement, and also reminding them that at the end of the day, they have the autonomy to choose whether it's a work that they want to continue to do or not, but definitely connecting them to resources as well. Having coaches, having mentors to guide them, I think is definitely important when we're talking about investing in young people and centering them in the movement as well.
Totally agreed. You know, one thing that I just want to also bring up, and I'm not sure that we have necessarily these examples on the conversation, but Eldra might be able to also speak to it, is, you know, again, I think it's really important for us to think about young people and all frontline communities actually owning their own solutions. So not just, you know, focused on philanthropy and advocacy, but actually philanthropy and advocacy to reroute capital to frontline led solutions. So what we were just talking about, whether that's community safety, you know, being able to reallocate capital that is being inefficiently spent on policing, inefficiently spent on mass incarceration, and actually reallocating that capital to the much more efficient and effective usage of money, which is into community-led alternatives. But also as we're thinking about every level of this, from housing to, the environmental injustice that's been done to Black, Brown, and systems impacted communities, Indigenous communities all over the country, I think also the role of capital, both philanthropic, to be able to resource those accelerators and be able to activate and develop the capacity of frontline communities to own those solutions, but also the largest part of those foundations, which is not their philanthropic capital at all. That's their PRI and MRI capital, which is exponentially larger. And all of that should be being reallocated out of all of the systems of harm that are harming our communities and into actual community-led solutions. And so I think, Eldra, I know that that's something that we've been working on, especially with the housing piece, but again, around systematically looking at this. So we're not fighting these fights forever, but we're actually fighting to win, and we're owning and governing what winning looks like, rather than trying to push a system to shift that really does not have necessarily the incentive structures to be able to ever do it more effectively than the community does. So I'd love to hear about, the models that you're thinking about, Eldra, that you all are doing in New Jersey, and also anybody else's, models on the call around that they're utilizing to really help build systemic infrastructure to be able to shift resources.
Thank you, Christina. One of the things that we're doing in New Jersey that stands out to me and I'd like to speak about here, and there was just a meeting on it this morning. The JJC, the Juvenile Justice Commission, since we've been out there working and in conjunction with Christina and some of her efforts there, they have just passed an assembly bill, and we will be going in and training the Juvenile Justice Commission for an apprenticeship program. And what that model looks like is young men, after they parole from the system, depending on how they show up in the world, they have the opportunity to apprentice and become youth workers and return to those facilities that they paroled from, return to the facilities, go back into the system from whence they came, and bring the healing model back as genuine, credible messengers to bring that healing back to those youngsters to begin to break that cycle and get them out of those routines and those addictions to those lifestyles that some of us get trapped into. And so the goal and what that looks like is in the next decade, the system will be flooded with people who were once oppressed by the system and now working from inside of this system from a healing modality, and not looking at those who are captured within the system as animals, enemies, or the quote unquote other, but as actual human beings and peers who, just like anybody else, need love. Yes, they've done something, and yes, there is accountability to be had from that. And there's no reason why someone who goes away as a juvenile should not have a second chance at a first-class life. And that's not something that the system today is geared to support, but we can help the system shift a tad bit.
And also that layers on the fact that you're working with folks outside of that system completely as well, right? Both on the front end and the back end to support community-led alternatives so that we're not dealing with either side of the system within that. So cool. Lupe, other questions on your side?
Yeah, I hear a lot about this youth power table, Jess and Brian. I'm wondering if you all have any words on that area of work.
I'm so sorry, Lupe. I missed the first. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
So there is and thank you, Laura, for putting it in the chat. There is a project as a part of the Andrus Family Foundation anniversary project that they launched to really think about what does it look like to put folks in philanthropy in direct relationship with youth leaders, youth organizers, and the youth justice movement. And so we, Jess and I, serve as project coordinators for the Visionary Freedom Fund, which is a collaborative fund that is youth-centered and intergenerational. So there are 8 young folks from across the country that are a part of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities that are coming together to help decide strategy and access to how to move grant dollars to the field of youth justice. And the project is really twofold. One is, how can we move resources in a more accountable way to movement, to folks in the youth justice field? And the second is, how do we continue to have this conversation and conversations like we're having today about what does that look like to resource frontline community solutions, which folks have described so great. And so the goal of the grant making is both pulling, so there are about 9 funders at the table and 8 young folks, and more folks who have given resources to the project that are not sitting at the decision-making body, and really thinking about how do we make these decisions together in a way that resources really transformative visions and change. So things that are not focused on reform, but things that are really focused on what Eldra described, right? So healing, whether it's healing projects or visioning about what alternatives could look like, or folks that are already actively working towards those things. And so the fund is going to actually launch in early January. So if there are folks on this call that you're like, hey, I know an organization that might be a good fit, or someone interested, like definitely let Jess or myself know, and send them, to the website or other places so they can potentially access some of this money.
Yeah, and our main value and kind of why we show up in this way or creating this process in this way is, we're seeing philanthropy as more of a resource and a tool and not being the architects, right? Like revolutions do not exist in RFP processes. Movements don't come with metrics that come from philanthropy, right? But yet that is the way that we are set up. And so how can we reimagine a process and an infrastructure that is actually reflective of the change that we say that we're actually trying to create, that is actually reflective of the values that we put on our websites, but doesn't always make it into the praxis of the work. And so, rather than continuing to change an initiative or a program, how do we move back and take an ecosystem approach and respect the architects, right? Like they're not just youth, they are youth organizers. Like let's put some respect on their names, right? Like they are youth directors, they are youth leaders, they have skills, they have resources, they have visions. They just need the resources to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Kat and Albert, maybe you can share a bit more then from the asset side, where you're deploying capital, in the spirit of what Brian and Jess were just mentioning, your all's work as you were describing it is deeply relational, right? It sounds like it deeply relational. And also, I know at least on Kat's side, there's a lot of shared decision-making and processes in there. And so could you both kind of share from your perspective, speaking to maybe other foundations or investors that might be joining us, how you all have set up your models to make sure that folks who are, on the front lines are actually a part of your process and in relationship to your work?
Thanks. Albert, shall I go? And then, okay. So thanks. So first of all, we are greatly advised by BIPOC and young leadership in our strategies, but I'll rattle off some of what they are. First of all, we try to address basic human rights with government efforts and philanthropy so that it doesn't undermine youth leadership. So particularly addressing food insecurity, through working with Eat, Learn, Play, No Kid Hungry, other organizations to acquire emergency feeding program resources at the state and federal level and carry those on into a post-COVID environment where all children are receiving free universal school food, which is the predominant source of calories for many young people, and hopefully through community college. Then also addressing the digital divide. If we have this grossly unfair connectivity and access that deprives young leadership of educational resources, that's a showstopper as well. So we've been very involved in device and connectivity bargaining with the big telecom companies and school districts and so on. Then we invest in youth leadership development organizations, many of them led by young people, from Good Samaritan Family Resource Center to Marin Performing Stars to Compton Kids Clubs. And we allow them to come to decisioning environments. So for instance, we took 60 young people from Compton, Marin City, the bank, to the opening of the first memorial to the victims of lynching in EJI. We've taken field trips to the first Black community in California, and Lowndes County, Alabama, the birthplace of the Black Panther movement, just trying to help that youth leadership connect with their histories and their communities, and then also providing them the resources to build their own organizations. We're very involved in philanthropic reform efforts, and I'm glad so many people have mentioned that. Philanthropy has been sitting on the sidelines, and it's time to accelerate charitable giving at the state with state and federal rules and incentives. It's hold philanthropy responsible for aligning their investment assets with public purpose, and certainly getting them to stop the harm that the $1 trillion of private foundation endowments and $120 billion of donor advised fund assets are doing right now by being invested in private prisons, predatory lending, fossil fuels, et cetera. And then minimizing self-interested charity, where grants are made to private hospitals and universities to guarantee better access. We have also tried to have a hand in involving major societal institutions, creating a bank, venture funds, political organizations to change the banking system for good, the financial service sector, try to elevate the youth vote. NextGen America was one of the largest youth mobilization efforts in 2018 and 2020. And then to also seed lands and resources to regenerative practitioners of regenerative agriculture, the dominant way that we tend our planet. We have participated in a community of practice around equitable community development, and recently made commitments of capital absorption capacity grants to 7 communities, including Inside Circle, and then pledging donor advised fund assets to those communities so that they can access low cost capital, and one day shifting the assets entirely. And then I am devoted to refashioning our economy around cooperative collective ownership models. So we're working with many organizations trying to build collective businesses that can be owned in community hands and also by employees. And then lastly, the Good Life Pledge, which I mentioned already, which we hope not only to live up to ourselves, 1/3 of the assets shifted at a minimum, but also to recruit other philanthropists. And we're starting with those 7 communities, hoping that we can find donors who will make the same sort of capital absorption grants and pledges of assets that we're willing to make.
Wow, Kat, I was trying to take notes at the same time as listen intently. So thank you. I mean, that's a range of, I think, tools and deep appreciations for you know, how the work shows up, I think, in California. So I think or across the nation, and really connecting the dots, and just really appreciate your leadership in kind of pushing the boundaries here in this discussion. I think to kind of lend the California Endowment's view into this conversation, I want to answer it a couple of different ways. One, I want to say that our investment in young people is part of a multi-pronged investment strategy. I mean, so we really invest at the local level, similarly to as Kat was describing in youth organizing groups at the local level, hyper local. We invest in networks and coalitions that kind of connect those groups across the state. We invest in both, capacity building efforts. So how do you build infrastructure where infrastructure doesn't exist? So that was a big emphasis of our work in this last decade, with a focus on the Central Valley, really lifting up, elements of infrastructure need within the state, taking this idea that within the field of philanthropy where it doesn't exist, we can build. And so I think that's part of, a kind of new element of muscle that we've seen in inland parts of California. I would say that we also invest in the ecosystem of technical assistance partners, knowing that this is part of an intergenerational model. So what does it mean to invest in data, research? What does it mean to invest in arts, culture? How do you invest in culture keepers that translate and amplify the message or the movement, kind of ideology and thinking, out into communities. And I would just say that, because we are a California-based a funding organization, it allows us to really hone in within the confines of our state. I mean, there are moments where we leverage, our national opportunities, where it makes sense, but we're really focused on California. So it gives us that opportunity to develop long and deep relationships with community. And we've really, learned that investing in power, community power, to largely move public funding infrastructure, right? Acknowledging that there's significant funding at the local level, at the statewide level, and acknowledging again that there are democratic processes attached to almost all of those opportunities, how school decisions are made, how city council decisions are made, how state legislative budgets are made. And so how do you really think about, kind of the change, infrastructure that's needed? And so then how do we show up as funders and invest in that kind of a way, right? So how do we, really facilitate general operating supports, deep long-term investments, and acknowledging that there's often, other tools in the toolbox. I want to also, the second part of the way that I wanted to talk about this is that, where it does make sense for us to leverage, shout out to Eric Braxton, co-executive director with Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing, is we also see a role in working with our philanthropic partners to leverage resources to increase resource investment into those most impacted by systemic lack of resources available to communities. And so what does it mean for us to show up with Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing, a national group of funders that really focus on the field of youth organizing, really invest in the long-term leadership development, but really going beyond leadership development and the practice of that leadership in some of those civic spaces that I just described earlier, right? Showing up on a Tuesday at a city council meeting, Wednesday at a school board meeting, and really, dismantling the systemic harms that have perpetuated some of the things that Kat was touching on earlier, and reimagining and rebuilding systems and infrastructure at the community level that's really rooted in grassroots leadership. So, I think, I'll begin to pause there, and we're learning into this. Like we're learning into, that's why I was taking notes earlier about how do we access all of the tools within our philanthropic toolkit, including our PRIs, our MRIs. How does the big money, our philanthropic set aside is really only 5. And so the big money is here. And how do we really, kind of mobilize power in that way? So again, just deep appreciations for this conversation. And I would just say that as we invest in young people, I mean, we just see that benefit in multiple levels. We see the benefit at the local, at the individual level. And, there's research that shows that you invest in young people, they're more likely to finish college. They're more likely to, exhibit a number of healthy behaviors, i.e. agency showing up. We know that there's a community benefit in terms of young people working on issues. And so we think that it's also a long-term investment in community, leadership from a longer term perspective.
Thank you all for sharing. I think it has become clear of the value of community voice and young people's voices, and their experiences in decision-making spaces. And what can youth adult equity look like in the future? We like to refer to like the Hart's ladder of young people's participation, right? Moving away from tokenism, moving away from manipulation and consultation, and really being in the same spaces with all of you in institutions who are willing to hear us out. So I really appreciate all of your wisdom and learning experiences. To stop perpetuating this harmful culture and traditional practices for our young people. So I really like hearing just the healing aspect, building someone up, right? Because when we bring in young people, we bring in their whole self. We bring in their trauma. We would bring in all that they've experienced in their own communities.
Yeah.
So I really, really appreciate that. Christina?
Yeah, Lupe, Shiva has a great question. I think that I have to read it because I don't think we can unmute folks. So I'm gonna suggest we're gonna move into Q&A from you all. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll start out with Shiva's. So there's a huge amount of capital flowing into the climate and environmental space in the next decade. How can we ensure this reaches Black, Indigenous, people of color, founders and companies, as well as community-led and owned solutions rather than the status quo? As a BIPOC founder here developing community-owned solar and microgrids, I feel pretty discouraged compared to the more mainstream climate solutions. I've got some ideas, but I'd love to hear some other folks' thoughts as well. Okay, I will take the answer, and then feel free to pile on. I think part of it is that there has to be actual principles. I think we need to push folks to actually have principles around their investments. And ironically, even though they're not kept to in philanthropy, oftentimes there's more principles on the philanthropic side than there actually is on their PRI or MRI side. And so I appreciate what you're bringing up, because you're bringing up both how philanthropy is leveraging its philanthropic investments, but also unlocking the other side of their world. And so I think certainly around principles, and those principles being values aligned with everything that they espouse on the other side of things in their philanthropic work is really, really important. And I know basically of like 2 foundations that actually do that. So, I think one basic thing is that we could all, as grantees of philanthropic institutions, or folks who run philanthropy, or folks who can influence board members of philanthropic institutions, be pushing for there to be a similar set of both screens as well as principles for investment on the PRI and MRI side that center frontline communities, that center Black, Indigenous, people of color founders, to be able to make sure that we're getting that capital into their hands, and that there's actual incentives for them to do so that can be created also both through our governmental institutions, but also that we can have pools of philanthropy, pools of investors, what we call syndicates of investors, that are willing to pile on with other folks who have similar principles to those investments. And in investment, being able to share, share the risk and also share the reward is actually incentivized, as opposed to philanthropic cycles, which are often more competitive. On the investment side, it's actually in all of our best interests to be sharing that risk. And so I think that's how I would suggest, and that's possible to happen on the governmental side. That's also possible to happen on the side of things with philanthropy and with syndicates of investors that create those incentives amongst them. Awesome. We've got a couple other questions here. Lupe, do you have one that's sticking out for you? Here's one from Laura. I would like to know from folks and board members of the Women's Foundation of California, would folks be interested in continuing this conversation on how to create infrastructure for young adult leadership? A circle model, inside circle model that we've used in bringing together ultra high net worth asset owners and formerly incarcerated young leaders and entrepreneurs is one model that we've used in the past. But I think the question here is there interest or folks to learn more about these models and come together around them? So we'll open that up to the group.
Well, since everybody's talking all at once, Christina, I'm always up for circle. I'm always up for the opportunity to sit in space where not only can I grow, but there's space for other people to grow. And my experience teaches me that it's necessary to have those spaces. And it might not look like a circle, but it's very necessary to have those spaces. We have, and I just want to honor here, Lupe, Karla, and Jessica. We're having a conversation, and I feel the power that they exude in leading this conversation and stepping into taking ownership and agency over where they want to see the world go. Because the truth of the matter is they will be running this one day or another. And the sooner we get behind them and support them in where they want to go, not only the better off will they be, but the better off we'll all be. One thing that is missing in our society that comes from indigenous cultures is rites of initiation, rites of passage. And young folks will burn the village down to feel the heat if they don't have purpose, if they haven't been mentored in what agency looks like, if they're not coming from a place of healing. So I'm always open to that space.
And I'm always open to learn from you all. Yes, let's continue.
Yeah, definitely always down to be in community with folks. You know, like in, you know, reflection and things that we've done right and we've done wrong or could have done better. You know, I think, you know, a lot of it is about how folks are existing in relationship to each other. And I feel like so many times, you know, like we come at things from a place of scarcity, right? A scarcity of resources, of credit, of like, you know, or ego, whatever it is, right? Of like, who's got to be the person that controls the ultimate strategy, right? And it's like, the reality is that if somebody has it, we need to leverage it. If somebody has something that's winning, we need to make it more broad and more deep. And if, I think we do that by being in deeper community with each other. And I think where we have failed oftentimes too is not the what of the work, but the how of the work, right? How we've built or lost trust, or how people have felt about the work, how people have been burnt out about the work. And so I think, again, you know, to the point of community, especially in this year, right now more than ever, we probably need more spaces for community, not less.
And it's in those spaces like that that Jessica just spoke about, where the magic happens, where the miracles happen, because we can talk all day long about money and resources and reallocation. One thing I know for certain is that when we deepen our relationships with one another, it is very difficult for us to see differences. It's very different. It's very difficult for me to see you as the other or an enemy or an adversary when I'm in deep relationship with first myself, but then willing to be open and be in relationship with you. And that's where real growth comes from. And then that's where those things we start to talk about, you know, principles and models about what we do with resources come from, because now I'm coming from a very different place. I'm not coming from up here and dealing with things. I'm coming from in here, and in here will never lie to me. It'll never lead me astray. This up here, no telling what's liable to happen.
Awesome. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, would love to have Eric, sounds like you have some resources that you'd love to share from your work at FCYO. Are we able to unmute Eric for us to be able to hear him speak?
Yes, give me just a second.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Awesome. Welcome, Eric. So as we just have a couple minutes left, do you want to just share a little bit about your resources, and then we will we'll close on out?
Sure, I'll be real brief. Thanks for including me and inviting me to be part of this great conversation. Good to see so many of you. Yeah, I mean, what I'll just say briefly is, you know, we started at the Funders Collaborative on Youth Organizing 20 years ago, supporting young people of color, low-income young people, queer and trans young people on the forefront of social justice movements. And we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. It's been amazing to see how this work has grown over the last 20 years. And part of what we believe is right now we're in this really pivotal moment in our history as a country where the direction of the nation is up for grabs, right? Are we going to move towards sort of greater justice and equity or away from it? And really the key, we believe, is in supporting the leadership of young people, and especially those who've been most impacted by injustice. And so I dropped in the chat, we're having a session as part of our 20th anniversary with some great youth organizing leaders to look at the last 20 years of youth organizing and what has been accomplished and what are the challenges coming forward. So if you're interested in digging in with funders and youth organizers on those questions, please come join us for that conversation. And please consider joining us as we put a challenge out to philanthropy to say, like, if you care about the future of this country, now is the time to invest in young people, not just as beneficiaries of services, but as the leaders and organizers of the kind of democracy and equity that we really need in the future. So again, really excited to be in partnership with all the folks at this table and to be getting resources to the young people who are literally saving our country right now. Glad to be with you.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing some of your wisdom with all of us. And we're just gonna take a moment to wrap up and just send a lot of thank yous to each and every one of you who contributed to this circle. I think there's a need and a want to continue this conversation, right? And also explore how can we bring in more youth voices, more young people into these spaces. And with powerful folks like you all who are challenging these institutions and are trying to change for us, right? And support us. So I really want to appreciate you all for making time. And as we slow down, I really resonated with Eldra's words of, right, when we move into these spaces, we come in with our heart and not our mind. And I think that helps us move smoother in these spaces and move smoother through the world with love, right? And being able to transmute any other heavy energy that comes around us into power and resiliency. So I just want to invite you all really, really quickly, just for a moment to visualize your heart. If you all could close your eyes really quick and just tap it into your heart and shield and protect that heart with the color. You know, what will that color be for you? And just feel it, see it, love it, appreciate it. And as we close out this circle, as we close out this space, you know, may we walk, you know, on earth and in our work and our positions and our roles with this color around our heart to symbolize the love and commitment that we have for our communities. And whenever anger comes up, whenever confusion comes up, may we light that color in that moment. So whenever you're ready, you can open up your eyes. I'm all about feeling, so it's just why I invite you all to do a lot of these tapping into our bodies. But I hope that you all remember that color moving forward and shield and protect yourselves with it as we move forward in this movement work. Thank you all so much. I don't know if anyone has last words.
All you. Thank you all. Appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day.